Hey, what's up, guys? Well, this is episode 1 of the Endless Endeavor podcast with Greg Anderson. And I want to give you guys a little bit of background about who I am as a person and what brought me from basically when I was a kid to sitting in this chair right now. And I think it's important to do that as episode 1. So if this were to ever grow any type of base and people were interested in what I'm bringing to the table or my guest or my perspectives, that they can always cycle back to episode 1 and get to know who I am as a person in a long format. So right out of the gates, we decided to go with the title Endless Endeavor because I think throughout my life, you know, as soon as I start to think that I have things figured out as a man, the rug's pulled out from underneath me. And before I know it, I feel like I'm treading water and sinking. And I think it's important to realize that as you start to think you figure this life out and things are working out and you got a good handle on what you need to do as a man and as a wife or as a husband or as a mother, like before you know it, there's a shift, you know, life circumstances change, new challenges are presented, and now you feel like you're back to square one. And I can't speak for everyone. I don't know if that's something that a lot of people go through, but I feel like I've been put back to square one over and over and over. And what it makes me figure or realize is that I think that's just the cycle of life. I think going through challenges, going through adversity, and figuring out how to persevere is the human experience. And in modern society, we're not consistently going through hard times. We're not consistently being faced with dangers or, you know, the lack of food or the inability to stay warm during the winters. And I shouldn't speak for the whole planet. There's a lot of places where that struggle is very real at this very moment. But from my perspective, where I grew up, and for most people that have the ability to pick this thing up and listen to my words, we're not going through that anymore. And struggle is something that consistently rears its ugly head. And I feel like in the last couple of years have figured out how to embrace that. And so that's what kind of motivated me and my wife as we were thinking about different ideas to go with this title, because that's what life is. It's an endless endeavor. And now as I'll be 40 soon, I feel like as a 40-year-old man, I'm starting to be comfortable with the approach to life that I don't know what tomorrow holds, and I'm comfortable with that. You know, there's a quote, and I apologize, I don't know who said it, but it's that true wisdom is acknowledging you know nothing. And that's resonated with me because as soon as you start to think you have this thing figured out, it's proven to you that you don't. And I have enjoyed finding myself in a place where I can embrace that now and say, you know what? I'm not very good at the things that I'm pursuing. I have a lot to learn in all aspects of my life. And I don't know who I'm going to be in 10 years. And I don't know who I'm going to be in 20 years, but I'm going to try and enjoy the journey as best I can. So that's what's brought me to right here today doing this podcast. A little bit of background about me, or you know what? Long format. Like we got 12 hours left on this SD card. So we can talk as long as we want. I grew up right here in Snohomish, Washington, outside of Seattle. Born and raised, went to high school here, and I would say I was your typical Snohomish high school kid. I liked drinking, I liked fighting, I didn't like schoolwork, and it didn't take long for me to realize I don't feel like continuing education and going into college. Why would I want to go into college and waste my parents' money when I hate school as is? And so I went into the military, not because I had some patriotic vision or because I wanted to go to war or I wanted to become this badass. I went into the military because I didn't know what else to do. And I think a lot of people go into the military for that very reason. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a natural path. It's something that's available. It makes sense. It comes with a lot of benefits. It comes with a lot of training and, education. And so I signed up for the Army in 1999, and I left that summer right after graduating. And for whatever reason, and I don't know why I thought to do this, because I wasn't a good athlete in high school. I was kind of a wild man, and I didn't take things too serious. But for whatever reason, I was like, you know what? If I'm going to give my life to the Army for 4 years, I might as well try and get as much as I can back out of the military. So that's what I did. I said, you know what? If I'm going to do this for 4 years, let's try and conquer the hardest thing they have to throw at me. And to this day, I think the best thing that you can do on a single enlistment is go into the 75th Ranger Regiment. Obviously, I'm biased because that's the path that I took, and I feel like it worked out very well for me. But what it allows you to do is really discover who you are as a person and face a lot of adversity and a lot of growth and a lot of turmoil. And they can pack that into a short amount of time, and they can give you the tools to really understand who you are as a man and where your breaking point is at and how you fit into a team. And you can learn about camaraderie. You can learn about leadership. You can learn about all these different aspects of just humanity. Those things aren't applicable to military fighting forces. Those things are applicable to everyone. And so I said, you know what? I need to go to the Ranger Regiment. I want to go through their selection process. I want to see if I can make it. And, you know, of course, a lot of times those type of things are an ego-driven motivation. I want to see how tough I am. I want to see how hard I am. And I went in, and they couldn't give me a Ranger contract because the recruiter said there were none available, like they always say, right? And luckily, I got an airborne infantry contract. So I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. I went through, you go through your basic training, you go through your AIT. I went through airborne school, and then I was slotted to go to the 82nd Airborne. And on I think it's the last day of airborne school, cadre from the 75th Ranger Regiment come down, and they say, hey, who wants to try out for the Ranger Regiment? And I was told this would happen. So I was hopeful that I would get the opportunity. But you never know, because the Ranger Regiment runs their selections based on needs of the regiment. So it just depends on where you're at the right time, if there's availability, and if they're going to run a selection. And luckily, I was afforded that opportunity. And, the sergeant that came down and picked us up, he, raise your hand if you want to be a Ranger, fall out. All right, right face, double time. And right there on the spot, they took us on a run that literally every single one of us fell out of. And that's your introduction to selection. They break you right there on the spot. And the funny thing is like at the time, it just made everybody feel like shit. Like, oh man, like I can't hack it. What is this? Come to find out, I was later told they send one of the fastest guys of the regiment down to pick up the new recruits to make that experience happen for regardless of who you are. So I don't know if other Rangers experienced that. That was how it went for me. And that's, you go right into RIP. You run from airborne school down to the RIP barracks, and I think you graduate on a Friday and you start RIP on a Monday. And so when I started RIP, and RIP stands for the Ranger Indoctrination Program. When I went through, it was 3 weeks. It has now been extended to 8 weeks, and it's changed its name to RASP. I think that's a Ranger Assessment Selection Process. And I might be wrong. It wasn't RASP when I was in. So if I butchered that, I'm sorry. Day one, we fall out in formation, and I was with several guys that I'd been with through boot camp, through airborne school, and by this point we've lived together for 6 months or whatever it's been, and they said, hey, we're going to call a couple names. If you hear your name, fall out to the rear of the formation. And they rattled off a few names, and then it's Private Anderson. Here, Sergeant, fall out. And so I fell out to the rear of the formation, and they said, listen, everybody's names that we called out, you're a medical recycle. Your physicals have expired, and you cannot continue this course with an expired physical. And that's because I was in the delayed entry program. Anyone that's been in the military understands what that is. But my physical was done way before I graduated, way before I went into the military. So if you add the time that I waited to go into the military after I signed up, and then the time that I took to go through boot camp and airborne school and AIT, it had been over a year and my physical was now void. So they said, this is how it's going to work. You can quit and go back to needs of the Army, which I would have been sent to either like Vincenza or 82nd, or you can do 3 weeks of holdover in the Ranger barracks and start with the next RIP class. And obviously I wasn't going to quit on day one because I had an expired physical, but you'd be surprised. Some guys did. They're like, you know what? I'm not going to sit around here for 3 weeks. I'm done. And every little step of the process you would see, they would be chipping away at guys to see if they would break. And it's interesting. Jocko talks about this in his podcast when he's referencing his experience in Buds. And he says, quitting was never an option for me. And I share that perspective. And I don't say that to be a tough guy. Like, I went through a lot of pain. I had a lot of bad nights in selection, but quitting was never an option for me. And it's interesting because the whole point of INDOC is to find the guys that quitting is an option for. And so as I was in holdover status, the guys that I started the program with started going through RIP. And some of them quit. And they came and found me and they said, Greg, it's not what you expect. It's nothing like you think it's going to be. It broke me. It might break you. It is scary. Like, I couldn't handle it, man. It was nothing like I expected. I thought I would never break, and I did. So I started thinking, I was 18 years old at the time. I'm like, what the fuck are they going to do to me? Well, what is going to transpire in the next 3 weeks, you know? And it's interesting because after that class wrapped up and then the cycle started for the next class that I was in, I never saw anything that I felt like should make a man break. And again, I don't say that to try and beat my chest or sound tough. It was a lot of yelling, a lot of projected anger from cadre, which is obviously choreographed because that's what they do. And then it was just absolute physical beatdowns. But, you know, one thing my drill sergeant said to me on one of my first days in boot camp, he's like, you can fatigue my body, but you can't smoke me. And that's something that stuck with me to this day as a 40-year-old man. You can make me do push-ups and flutter kicks and wind sprints and hit the wood line at Cole Range. And any ranger listening knows exactly what I'm talking about. You can fatigue the body to the point where it doesn't work anymore, but that shouldn't break your mind and it shouldn't break your spirit. And the reason that they incorporate that as a big part of selection is because if your mind and your spirit breaks in combat, there's no phone to call mommy. There's no bell to ring saying I quit. It's you have to do and you have to win, period. And, you know, like, the Rangers have been around a long time. They understood what they needed to do in order to weed out the people that quitting was an option for. One particular exercise I remember is we were out at Cole Range. It was in February and it was raining and it was cold. In Fort Benning, Georgia, people think the South is warm. It's warm in the summer. In the winter, I think Fort Benning, Georgia is one of the coldest places on planet Earth. And they said each squad grab a log and hold it over your head. And so each squad grabbed a log and we held it over our head. And the cadre said, listen, Rangers, those logs are going to stay above your head. Not one fucking log is going to touch the ground until 3 people quit. From the platoon, we need 3 quitters. And then this drill will be over. And I remember thinking like, damn, like, wonder how long this is going to take. And the cadre goes, guys, it can be 3 minutes, it can be 3 hours, or it can be 3 days. It's totally up to you guys. But this exercise does not conclude until we have our 3 quitters. If you decide to quit, you can come over to the bonfire here. We got hot dogs and hamburgers grilling up. We got hot coffee. You can warm up. You can dry off. We'll give you a change of clothes. And it's no hard feelings. We're not going to be upset with you at all. Like, we know this isn't for everybody, and we know that there's some people out there right now that don't want to be here, and they're already starting to question if this is what they want to do. And if you're that person, we respect that. We respect that. Come and have coffee with us, and grill up dinner, and just be honest with yourself that maybe the Ranger Regiment isn't for you. And I remember sitting there holding that log over my head, freezing, thinking, well, I'll die out here if I have to. Because I'm not the toughest guy out here. I'm not the strongest. I'm not the fastest. But I know that I can stand out here until my body quits. And as long as other men are doing it, I'm going to be doing it right next to them. And shockingly, to my surprise, 3 people ended up quitting. Now, the funny thing about this story is everybody always asks me, how long did it take? And I am here to tell you, I have no idea, because you just find yourself in that zone where you try and it's almost like a meditative state to just manage the pain, manage the lactic acid that's building up in your arms. And you just go to your happy place. And to tell you the truth, I don't remember if it was 1 hour or 6 hours. And so very early on, it became clear what the special operations community is looking for in people. They're not looking for the toughest. They're not looking for the fastest. They're not looking for the strongest. They're not looking for the machismo guys that are beating their chest. They're not looking for the guys that are 250 pounds of shredded muscle. What they're looking for is 2 things. They're looking for the inability to quit and the ability to work well with others. And those 2 things are what builds success in special operations. I found as a young private that I didn't play, I did track and I did wrestling and I did all that through like middle school and my freshman year. And then I gave up on sports because I found alcohol and girls, and I wasn't interested in pursuing the things that took a lot of effort. And to this day, I regret it, because as soon as I got to the regiment, I realized the guys that were athletes all through high school, the guys that grinded and played soccer and wrestled, like they were already a leg up on the guys that didn't. Because a big part of athletics is not only physical conditioning, but learning to work well with other people. And I remember thinking about this as a young man. It's like, okay, I need to play catch up with these guys. I need to get on their level, because they can run harder than me. They can ruck harder than me. And what do I got to do to change that? And a big part of special operations is finding where you fit in. What's your niche? And it's interesting, because a good part of competent leadership is putting your men where they're best suited. You get the dude that's just a beast that can ruck all day and all night. Let's make him your 60 gunner. Let's make him carry the heavy load. You got the guy that's real tech savvy and has experience with comms. Well, boom, he's your RTO. And everything in between, every single position, let's try and put the best suited person into that position. And I feel like I found my niche as a young man in the Ranger Regiment. And what that niche for me was, I figured out how to be a team player. And I plan on doing lots of episodes of this podcast with military leaders that led men at a level way higher than I ever did. I don't pride myself on being some experienced, competent leader. I was an NCO when I left the regiment. I led patrols in Afghanistan, and I went on to different leadership positions in contracting and law enforcement. But I was never the guy raising my hand saying, hey, make me a leader. I want to be a leader. And that's because I felt like I was always better suited as a team member. And I think that that's an interesting thing to think about as a man or as a woman, because people that want to lead typically come from one of 2 different backgrounds. They either want to lead for selfless reasons or they want to lead for selfish reasons. And if you're raising your hand saying, I want to promote, a lot of times those people aren't the right people to promote. Because if they're the ones raising their hands saying me, what is their motivation behind that? And again, there's great military leaders that put their hand up and said, make me, I want to go through OCS, or I want to become an NCO. And they excelled at that position. But for me, I was always a little hesitant because I was like, am I really ready to lead men in combat? Like, that's intimidating to me. And I can admit that. And I'm okay with that. And what I noticed is that promotions will find you if you're the right person, even if you don't want them to. And what my platoon sergeant and my PL ended up doing is they waited till we were deployed to Afghanistan on our first deployment over there. It was 2002. And I was pulled into the hooch and they said, hey, Greg, combat promotion, you're a sergeant now. And you don't have to go to the board. You don't have to go do an interview and put your dress blues on, but you're taking Alpha 3-1 and, congratulations, go move in with your new team. And I was terrified, to tell you the truth, because I went from a tabbed Spec 4. I'd went through Ranger school. I had my Ranger tab to now, boom, I was a team leader and I was in charge of making decisions on the battlefield that were going to affect the lives of other men. And I didn't feel like I was ready for it. And I don't think you ever feel like you're ready for it. And I've learned that lesson in military and law enforcement. I learned that lesson in jiu-jitsu over and over and over. Every belt that I got all the way up to black belt, it's like, oh no, I have no business having a purple belt wrapped around my waist. Oh no, I have no business having a brown belt wrapped around my waist. And I feel like being promoted in any aspect of life, you have two ways to approach it. You either sink or you swim. And I feel like I rose to the occasion as a team leader. It was, I went in a peacetime army and I saw a lot of hazing and a lot of yelling styles of leadership and people that treated people poorly. Even in an all volunteer army, people that rose their hand and say, hey, I want to be in the army and I want to be a Ranger and I want to go through selection. And then you get there and there's people that treat you like shit. And that never made sense to me. It's like, okay, I fucked up. I'm a young private. I don't know where all the equipment's at, and I don't know all the SOPs, and I don't know how to operate this piece of equipment. And you're going to fuck up. That's part of being a private. And I learned at a young age how competent and confident leaders lead. And it's very different from how insecure leaders lead. And I got a story that I like to share because it's something that resonated with me when I was 19 years old or whatever it was. And it's something that I think about to this day. And his name was Sergeant Arredondo. And shout out Arredondo if he's listening. We're still in touch to this day. He took over my team when I was a private. And I previously had a team leader that was hard on us, like always yelling, always, if we fucked up, you're doing push-ups, you're low crawling, you're duck walking up and down the hallway. And it got to a point where, yeah, smoke me. I don't care. Go ahead. You know what? I'll do push-ups for the next hour. I don't care. Okay. I'll do sprints in the field for an hour. I don't care. And you learn to be tough and hard that way, but you don't learn about unit cohesion. You don't learn about respect, and you don't learn about leadership, in my opinion. So we got this new Sergeant Arredondo, and I don't even remember what we did, but the privates in my squad, me included, I was a private at the time, we fucked something up. And he came in the squad room and he goes, hey guys, did you just do this? And I don't remember what it was. I'm sorry again. That's not great for the story, but it doesn't matter. The point remains. And we're like, yeah, we did, Sergeant. Totally expecting we're going to go get smoked and we're going to go do push-ups and we're going to do flutter kicks until we throw up and we're going to have to fill our canteens with water 5 times, whatever, bring it on. Fuck it. And he sits down and he goes, sit down, guys. He goes, I don't know how it was with your last team, but now I'm part of your team and I'm your team leader. Anything that you guys do that poorly reflects on the team as a whole, it reflects on me. So now not only do you guys look like you made a mistake, but we all made a mistake together. And now our team looks like we're operating poorly. I am not going to have a team that functions poorly. I'm really disappointed in you guys. Let's not let this happen again. And he walked out of the room. And I remember the 4 privates, we were all staring at each other like, what the fuck just happened, dude? Like, it was heavy. It was a 180-degree approach to leadership that we were used to. And it resonated with every one of us. We're like, you know what? I'm never letting Sergeant down again. I feel like a piece of shit. And, you know, the other squads may argue this because I'm friends with a lot of those guys to this day, but I felt like we became the closest, tight-knit, best operating squad in the platoon. And our platoon overall was a great platoon. And it taught us that in order to move forward as a team, we have to respect each other first. I have to respect you as a man. You have to care about me as a human being. And this was all peacetime Army. 9/11 had not happened yet. And I think it's easy for a peacetime military to slide back towards that, you know, that draft era mentality where shut up, sit down, fucking do this. And I feel personally that the draft era military, they did that because you had a bunch of people that didn't want to be there. You had a bunch of people that were afraid to serve, that wanted to look for an out. But if you fast forward 30 years into the 90s, everybody there raised their hand. They raised their hand multiple times to be in the Ranger Regiment. So you got to ask yourself, not only did this guy volunteer over and over and over to be here, but he passed our selection and now he's in our squad. How should we treat that guy? And Sergeant Arredondo, he doesn't know this. I've never talked to him about it. He changed my perspective on leadership in a moment. And it's something that I adopted and I carried for the rest of my life. And now fast forward to when I got a team and I became a sergeant and I was the team leader. You know, I don't want to beat my chest and say I was the greatest team leader in the company, but what I will say is that I believe the proof is in the pudding, because I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with those guys, and every guy that was underneath me, I'm still friends to this day. You know, James Dupay, Jay Zadunik, Eric Bohannon. These are guys that I can call right now and say, hey, I got some questions for you, or I want to bounce something off you, or what do you think of this? And not only can I do that to them now, but I feel like that is how I engaged them back then when I was an NCO and they were my privates and they were my Spec 4 saw gunner. And it just built a path to where we felt like we're in this together. Because if you don't feel like you're in it together with your men, I feel like you're out of touch with your men. And man, Afghanistan was crazy. It was our last deployment there was 6 months together. And I don't say crazy in the realm of combat. I never fired my weapon in Afghanistan. Not one time. You know, we got IED'd a time or two. We had incoming, which is if you're deployed, you're getting incoming. Had a couple troops in contact with different patrols from my platoon that I wasn't personally on. But what Afghanistan taught me was that people on the other side of the world, for the most part, they want what I want. They want security. They want to love their kids. They want to be able to have a roof over their head. They want to be able to buy food. And the culture over there was so appreciative of what we were doing as a U.S. military, ousting the Taliban from these villages. People have no idea what it was like over there. The Taliban would go village to village, and they would tell us stories. We had interpreters with us, and the village elders would come out. They would thank us. They would get in fights and arguments with each other over who got to make us dinner that night, who got to provide us a place to sleep that night, because they wanted to show their gratitude for us ousting the Taliban from northeastern Afghanistan. And it was so interesting because these people would tell us stories. They said, yeah, when the Taliban was in control, they would roll into our villages on Hilux pickup trucks with mounted machine guns. And they would say, bring every child out under the age of 5. Line the children up. And they would mow them all down with a machine gun. I mean, I'm getting emotional just talking about that. And I never saw that. But these village elders in Afghanistan, they told me these stories. And they said they'd do the same thing with elders. They'd say, hey, if you're over the age of 70 or you're over the age of 60, whatever it was, they just some arbitrary number that these assholes would come up with. and they'd shoot them all. And the only reason they did that is because they wanted these people living in utter fear. Because when someone fears you, you have control over them. And what I saw in Afghanistan was a culture of grateful people that wanted peace and happiness. And again, I can only speak for where I was at. I was in Bari Kaut, which is north of Asadabad, up in the Kunar Valley, up on the Pakistani border, and Nare and Dokalam and all these little villages up there. And it was the overwhelming majority of people were just good human beings. And it's an experience that I hold close to my heart to this day, because I think people have a misconception of what's going on the other side of the world. And, I come home and I hear people say, fuck the Middle East. Let's nuke it. Let's make it a sheet of glass, kill them all. Let God sort them out. All that kind of shit. And it's like, well, actually, I'm in one of the most elite fighting forces on the planet Earth. And I don't feel that way at all. And there are pockets of people that absolutely need to be shot in the fucking face. And that's what the 75th Ranger Regiment is for. You will never hear me dispute that. ISIS, let's fucking kill them all. The Taliban guys that were controlling people with fear over there, let's kill them all. Trust me, to this day, there's days that I want to strap on my body armor and deploy at 40 years old and be like, I fucking still got it. That's going to be inherent in who I am for the rest of my life. But the other side of that, to use Jocko's word, as the dichotomy of that is to be a proficient warrior and to be able to embrace combat and killing and the hate that comes with that. The dichotomy is that you need to be able to love, and you need to be able to appreciate, and you need to be able to see people for what they are and who they are. And the truth is, from my experience, there's a lot of good people in the Middle East. There's a lot of good people in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I spent a lot of time in Jordan. Same thing. And so I feel like, looking back, I was fortunate that my time with the Ranger Regiment wasn't rooted in bloodshed and killing. And it was actually quite the opposite. It was learning that people are people. And moving forward in my life, I did find myself in sustained combat. I did find myself killing other human beings. But since my initial experience with deployments and cultures in third world countries was so different than what I expected, I feel like that helped me stay grounded as a man. And so fast forwarding, we did some QRF operations. We had downed helicopters, downed C-130s, and I'll be doing some entire episodes on some of those events because some fascinating things took place from some of those missions that affect me to this day. And I look forward to sharing some of those stories with you guys. But I did my time in the Ranger Regiment, and when my ETS date came up, I didn't want to stay in the military. There was a lot of aspects of the military that I loved, but there was a lot of aspects of the military that I wasn't happy with too. And so when the date came to get out, I decided it was best for me to get out, go to college, get my degree, because I felt like I had the discipline and the wherewithal now to be able to do that successfully. But shortly after getting out, I got a phone call from a guy who said, I was in it, Jonathan Storter, shout out Storter. He was in the platoon with me, and he said, hey, I got an in on a company called Triple Canopy. It was started by a bunch of Delta Force guys, and they're deploying and they're doing cool shit overseas, and they're making tons of money. And I was like, you know what? I'm in. All the good aspects of the military, deploying, good guys, camaraderie, without all the red tape of the military. And it was something that it just immediately appealed to me. And I'll tell you straight up, the contracting world was painted with a broad brush as shitheads, because as always, and we'll talk about this in regards to law enforcement, as always, the minority gets to be the voice for the majority. And a few shitheads really painted the contracting world out in a way that wasn't what I experienced personally as an individual. So Triple Canopy decided that they were going to run a short 3-week selection to see if you are somebody that makes sense to operate within that company and within those teams. And at the time I was 22 years old, and I contacted the recruiter via email and said, "Hey, I heard from this guy that this is available, and I just got out of the 75th Ranger Regiment." And they said, "Okay, that's your resume meets the level that we're looking for. Come down to selection and we'll welcome you the opportunity to try out and work for our company." And it's interesting because, yeah, it's a private company, but it was absolutely a military selection process. It was working. It was PT. It was shooting. It was learning tactics. It was learning the security detail mission, because that is what the contracts we were bidding was: personal security details protecting diplomats. And so as we were going through this selection, and again, this is something that I hold dear to my heart to this day. I remember thinking at the time, dude, I'm 22 years old. Like, a lot of these guys are retired Special Forces, retired Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Force Recon Marines, PJs. You couldn't submit your resume to Triple Canopy in 2004 unless you came from the Special Operations community. So me and another Ranger, who's a good friend of mine to this day, he'll do an episode with us one of these days. We went through selection together, and we were young, and it just became clear, you know what? I just have to be able to PT, I have to be able to shoot, and I have to be able to be a team player. I have to let these guys know that I bring value to the team, not because of my expertise and my ability to operate and kill bad guys and drive cars. I bring value to the team because I'm all in with you. I'm down with what you guys are asking me to do. I'm not going to bitch. I'm not going to gossip. I'm going to put my head down. My eyes are open. My mouth is shut, and I'm going to get the job done. And I'm here to do that for this team and for this company. And we actually lost a decent amount of guys through that selection process. And I remember when it was over, they, "Hey, congratulations, we're going to hire you. Go back home to Seattle. We're going to put you on what's called a retainer." They paid us $150 a day to not work because they didn't want us to have obligations elsewhere. They said, "When we call you, we need you to be ready to deploy. So that's why you're on what's called a retainer." And sure enough, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a call, said, "Hey, we bought you a flight to Amman, Jordan. You leave in 3 days," or whatever it was. "And you'll be contacted at the airport by this company representative, and you'll get further direction from there." And got on a plane, and Royal Jordanian flew commercial to Jordan, and got contacted at the airport, and they said, "Hey, okay, these are the teams you guys are going on." And they told me I'm going to what was called Team Miami, and all the teams were named after stateside cities. They said, "Yeah, you're going to Team Miami, which is in Ramadi, Iraq." And this was April 2004. And it was actually, while I appreciate my experience in Afghanistan, it also made me a little complacent. And I can admit that, because I was like, you know what? I've done 1,000 patrols. I'd never been shot at. Got, yeah, sure, a couple IEDs, but like, hey, it's all good, man. Like, this combat thing's not that scary. And what I found once I got to Ramadi, and anyone who's been to Ramadi will tell you, it's the fucking Wild West out there. Everybody's heard about Ramadi from Task Force Bruiser, and Jocko did a lot of podcasts on it, which is cool because it gives people an idea of what's going on out there. But Ramadi in 04, 05, 06, it is something that I can't even describe with words. I've had people ask me, "So could you go to the store or go shopping or anything?" And the answer is not only no, fuck no. And not only no, but if you went and tried to go to a store in Ramadi, Iraq, 100% chance you're going to get killed. There's gunmen all over the city. There's Al-Qaeda all over the city. They controlled the majority of it. And the thing about them, they weren't afraid to fight. They would bring the fight to you every chance they got. And to this day, I think about that like, man, you can't fault those guys. They had a belief system that they were willing to die for. They weren't intimidated, and they were ready to fucking throw down. And even though I was in a contracting role, make no mistake about it, when you're on the streets of Ramadi, Iraq in a motorcade with a bunch of special forces and special operations veterans, shit's going down, man. And it went down over and over and over and over. And it got to the point where, like, and I don't say this to sound like calloused or battle hardened. It got to the point where combat, shooting guys, people shooting RPGs at you, mortars blowing up on the rooftop that you're sitting on. It was just another day. It got to the point where that was the norm. You know, we got attacked on average 40 times a month in Ramadi. And that's all attacks. That's indirect. That's small arms fire. That's IEDs. But whatever it is, something's happening daily. And a lot of days it's happening more than daily. And so it was just a shock to me to go from a culture where everybody appreciated us, and I felt like the local populace had our back on most things. And I'll go into some stories on that in future podcasts. Afghanistan, they're Afghani people to this day, that I consider that some of the Afghani people to have saved my life. You know, they went out of their way to protect us. And Iraq was just 180 degrees from that. And that was my first experience in Iraq, was going right to Ramadi. I flew into BIOP, which is Baghdad International Airport, and the team was there to pick me up, and we drove to Ramadi. But what a lot of people don't realize is in Iraq, you have the different groups of people. You have the Sunnis, you have the Shias, you have the Kurds, and Saddam was a Sunni. So the Sunni controlled areas, it was good. Under the Saddam regime, they were doing well because their guy was in power, right? So when he was overthrown, everything went to shit in the Sunni triangle. And there was a lot of violence, and there was a lot of discontent and disgust for Americans and Western ideologies. And that was something that never really seemed to subside the whole time I was in Ramadi. I was in there for 2 years, 04 and 05. And, it's interesting because you think you start to have an understanding of how deployment cycles work and how foreign cultures are. And then you realize, oh, wait, this is a new thing. This is a different thing. And it's a learning process all over again. And, fast forward a couple of years, I did a 2-year contract in Erbil, which is Kurdish controlled area. And same thing, 180 degrees from Sunni controlled areas. The Kurds loved us. They treated us with respect. They allowed us to eat at their restaurants and go shopping in their malls. So every deployment came with its own challenges, and some were super violent, and we had to fight our way off the streets, and we were getting ambushed and cars blown up and lots of crazy stories in Ramadi. And then a lot of crazy, or I should say not so crazy stories up in northern Iraq where, again, I went, I think a year and a half, never fired my weapon one time up there. It's just a different culture. And so I really enjoyed my time contracting. To this day, I feel like I developed as a competent team member and a leader better in that 5 years than I did in any other 5-year period of time in my life. But when I was in Erbil on my last contract, I got a Facebook Messenger, and and the screen lights up, and I look, and it's my wife, Jenny, had sent a positive pregnancy test. And she said, hey, she'd been with me for a long time while I was constantly deploying over and over and over. And she goes, I think it's time we put this behind us. And it's funny because in my heart, I was never going to put contracting behind me. I loved the mission. I loved the guys. It was good pay. And it was just something that resonated with those teams. And I said, you know what? You're right. If I'm going to be a father, I can't be a father on the other side of planet Earth. And that is what initially led me into looking into a career stateside, which ended up being federal law enforcement. And so I got home from my last contract and I put in my application with the US Marshals. I thought that would be a good thing for me to do, because you see the movies about the US Marshals, The Fugitive, Tommy Lee Jones chasing Harrison Ford all over the country, jumping off dams and shooting through windows and stuff. I was like, you know what? That's going to give me that ability to have that high speed lifestyle where I'm out running ops and I'm chasing dudes, and I'm going to have my team with me, and we're going to have tactical gear on, and we're going to be well trained. And I just had a lot of expectations that ended up falling short. And again, every time I talk about the Marshal Service, I don't want to say anything disparaging about them, because in the Marshal Service, there's 94 different districts. And in each district, you have your own chain of command. It's structured very differently, and it's a completely different experience. It almost feels like a different agency. So a lot of guys have a good experience with that agency. I was in Los Angeles, and I did not. Now, I'll tell you, I had a good experience as far as living in Los Angeles, learning how to do the job as a DUSM, they call them, Deputy United States Marshal. It's an acronym. I met a lot of good deputies. I worked with a lot of good deputies. To this day, I'm friends with a lot of guys that I worked with in Los Angeles. And I was on what was called the SRT team. That's a special response team. And we were responsible for the like high risk warrants. So they have this matrix where they kind of assess what a certain arrest is going to look like. And if it's a violent crime and he has a history of weapons, or however the matrix is analyzed, they say, you know what, this is going to be an SRT raid. And we would do those raids. And dude, I tell everybody to this day, if the SRT team was a full-time job, I'd still be in Los Angeles with the US Marshal Service. I love that team. I love those guys. I love the mission. But the reality of my experience with the Marshal Service is SRT was 1 or 2 days a month. And the other, 20 work days, however it played out, I was sitting in court behind a prisoner who was already taken into custody from either our agency or another. And I was listening to his court proceeding. Now, every single federal arrest, that arrestee is remanded, which what remanded means is given custody to the U.S. Marshal Service. So as soon as ATF, FBI, DEA, any of these 3-letter agencies, when arrest is made, now the Marshal Service is in control of that body. And we have to house them, and we have to produce them for any of their court hearings. So their initial appearance, their arraignment, their change of plea, their guilty plea, their trial hearings, like anything that they needed to be standing before a judge for, there had to be 2 U.S. Marshals standing next to them. And that was the mission. That went on for years. And we were in charge of the transports of the prisoners to the courthouse. We would have to go pick them up at different jails. We'd drive out to San Bernardino all the time, or we'd have to get them from what was called MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center, downtown LA. And we're just basically a taxi service for prisoners. And the job has to be done. It's an honorable job. There's tons of good people that do it. But for me, it wasn't what I wanted out of that agency. I wanted something different. I wanted the SRT team full time. And that's kind of what I thought I was getting into when I joined that agency. And some guys love the agency and they are doing a lot more high speed stuff, but it's like anything in the military and law enforcement. It's luck. It's right time, right place. You get to promote to this team and now you get to do this mission. And at least in the military, a lot of times that it was luck in combination with merit. If you proved yourself and you were a hard worker and you stood out amongst your peers, you would be rewarded for that. But in the federal government, nothing was based on merit. Everything was based on the same timeline. Everybody promoted at the same time. And if you wanted to promote past 11 or 12 rather, you had to take a test and you had to go through this process that was really geared towards book smart people, not street smart people. So in the Marshal Service, you see a lot of book smart people leading teams of street smart people, guys that are good on the streets, guys that are good at talking to people, guys that have good tactical experience and backgrounds. And it just kind of set up a scenario that I didn't feel comfortable working with when I commonly found, this was a daily occurrence, and I'm not going to say her name, but my supervisor would call me in her office almost daily and be like, Anderson, will you sit down for a second? I want to run some things by you. And she would just start going down the list of everything that she needed to do that day and wanted to get my perspectives on it and what I would do and what I think she should or shouldn't do. And it's like, come on. Like, now, from a leadership perspective, I do agree that leaders should take into considerations the thoughts and concerns of their subordinates, but not to a point where they're basically leaning on you because they don't have the capabilities themselves. Those are two very different things. And so in 2015, I found out my dad was terminally ill up in Seattle. And I went to my supervisor and I said, hey, here's the deal. You know, the whole reason I put behind the military and the deployment lifestyle is because I needed to put family first. And now my father has been given X amount of months left to live. I have to be there with him. This is important to me as a man. It's important for my family. And you guys always preach family first and the importance of keeping the family unit tight. Like, but what I found out is that was more lip service coming from them than something that they're really willing to put their money where their mouth is. And I kept getting the runaround. They said, Greg, we want to help you out. We want to get you on TDY up there, but we have to make requests. It has to be approved through headquarters. You know, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. And I was kept being told, be patient, just be patient, Greg. We're going to get you up there. And it got to a point where I said, you know what? I'm done being patient. I've always been a good deputy. I'm well respected within the district. No one has anything bad to say about me. I have zero discipline on my record. I'm just telling you, I need to be with my dad. So however you make that happen, you need to make it happen, or I'm going to make it happen. And that's not me trying to be a dick or threaten you guys. That's just me telling you how my life is going to move forward with or without the agency. And, yeah, they said, well, we can't help you. We just need a little more patience out of you. And I said, okay, we've already been down this road. So I am moving home on December 15th and I'm going to be with my dad. And I ended up putting myself on an unpaid leave status and I left the agency and I moved home to Seattle and I was with dad for 5 weeks. He lived 5 more weeks. And so he got a lot of closure, as did I. I felt like we bonded in those 5 weeks more than we probably ever had. And I also feel like I gave him permission to pass because he got to a point where he was comfortable in his heart knowing that I was home now. I was with mom and my sister. Him and I really got a lot of closure in our relationship. And I think he felt comfortable finally letting himself pass. And to this day, I knew I knew that that was the decision that had to be made. And I'm grateful that I did it because if I hadn't done that and I missed that opportunity to have those experiences with him, it's something I would have regretted the rest of my life. Like I beat myself up regularly for quitting high school wrestling to this day. And I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I've done MMA fights. Like if there was any path to make up for quitting wrestling, I feel like I should be happy enough with what I've done on the mats to make up for that. Nope, wrong. I fucking hate it because I quit something that I knew I needed to do. And it's something that I've held over my own head to this day. So I can only imagine how much animosity I would hold towards myself if I'd let my agency say, you know what, Greg, you got to stay here. And I say, okay, I'm going to stay here and miss that closure with my father. And it's funny because I find myself in similar situations over and over and over. And the situation that I found myself with the Port of Seattle wasn't much different. It was based on principle. It was something that I believed, and it led to the end of that career. And so moving forward from when I came home from the Marshal Service, moved back to Seattle, brought my family back here, we opened this place, the place that you see right here. I said, you know what? I got my black belt down there. I feel like I'm a pretty good instructor and I love jiu-jitsu. Let's try and do something with jiu-jitsu. And so we did. And we used all the money that we made on selling our house in Seattle, because we bought when the market was down and we sold when it was up, and we did pretty well. And I said, let's open a jiu-jitsu academy. And we built this facility from the ground up and developed a curriculum and a team, and we put CrossFit downstairs. We're up on the second story here, and we just built a really good community of people that's been going strong for 5 years. And I love what we have here. But the reality of what I learned is I'm not raising a family of 5 teaching jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is great. I love jiu-jitsu, but it's hard as a career and as an income. And the other thing that I started to find was once my mortgage and once my credit card and once my cell phone bill was attached to jiu-jitsu, it started attaching the real stresses of life to my mats. And it's interesting because a lot of people will say, if you do what you love for a living, you never work a day in your life. And I know that that works out well for some people. But what I found personally is when I did what I loved for an income, it attached a lot of stresses to it. And it made me start to resent jiu-jitsu, because instead of being here for the love of jiu-jitsu, now I was focused on, how many members do I have? Oh, this guy just canceled his contract. We don't have a good advertising campaign this month. We didn't pick up any new members, and so on and so on and so on. Instead of the focus being, hey, the people that we have here, let's give them the best jiu-jitsu that we can give them. Let's build good relationships with them. Let's have fun with them. Let's build a team of people that looks out for each other on and off the mats, because that's what jiu-jitsu is about. I always joke that 10% of jiu-jitsu is choking people or armbarring people. The vast majority of what you gain here is community. It's the ability to persevere through discomfort. It's the ability to face adversity and be comfortable doing so. You learn a lot of things on the mats that apply off the mats. And that is why anybody that gives jiu-jitsu 3 months of their life, they're hooked. I always tell people that's the magic number. 3 months of your life. Dedicate it. Go to practice. You're going to hate it. You're going to get beat up. You're going to get tired. You're going to be sweaty. People are going to have their knee on your stomach, and you're going to have a hard time breathing. But once you get past that initial period of time where you literally feel like a fish flopping around, as soon as it starts to click, the first time you sweep somebody or the first time you roll to a dude's back and catch a choke, it's like, oh, wow, it's working. It starts to feel like magic. Like Rogan always says, jiu-jitsu feels like a magic power. And it's the truth, because the more you train, I always talk about this with my students. As you train, the blue belt that's above you and the purple belt that's above him, they're all kicking your ass on the same level, because as you progress, they progress. And as you progress, they progress. So it's hard for you to feel like you're gaining any type of momentum or that you're getting better. But the day a new day one white belt shows up and you do whatever you want to him, you have a full grown man who's a strong athlete that may have played football or whatever, and you can just take him down, get on top of him and choke him, and he can't do anything to you. That's when you first see the power of jiu-jitsu. And when you have that moment, you're going to be hooked. And, I always joke that ego brought me to jiu-jitsu. And to a certain extent, ego keeps me at jiu-jitsu. People always say, check your ego at the door. But the truth of what we do here is it's man-on-man combat. And you're dealing with other people that are coming at you with aggression. They're coming at you with the intent to defeat you. They're coming at you with the intent of choking you unconscious and ripping your arm off. And you get the whole spectrum. Some guys train gently, and then some guys are just wild animals that come at you like a raped ape. But what you learn is you learn how to deal with all these problems that are being presented to you. And once you learn how to deal with the adversity on the mats, what I always tell my students is people that throw adversity at you through in your professional life or your personal life or out on the streets, it doesn't make you have that spiked reaction where you're ready, 0 to 100, feeling all fired up. No, because you can be calculated in the face of adversity, because if you're not calculated in jiu-jitsu, you're not doing it right. Yes, being a good athlete helps. Yes, having a good gas tank helps. Yes, being flexible helps. The physical body, the better you create your physical body and your physicalities, the better your jiu-jitsu is going to be. But in its core, jiu-jitsu is a thinking man's game. And you have to figure out a game plan to defeat another person. And so once you do that enough on the mats here, and then you're at work and your boss is all mad about something, it's a lot easier for someone that experiences a lot of adversity on a daily basis to take a step back and be like, no, it's all good. I got it. And what people will see is in your personal and your professional life, they'll see that confidence that you gained through jiu-jitsu, and they don't fuck with you the same. And again, that's not because I'm a tough guy or I'm going to beat my boss up or anything like that. But I saw leaders throughout my time in law enforcement that would treat people like shit. They would talk to them poorly. They would bark orders at them. But then when they talk to me, they have a different tune. And you got to ask yourself, why is that? I mean, I'm not going to beat up my supervisor in his office. I think everybody knows that. That's a clear understanding. But it's just when they have that understanding that, okay, if this were to go bad for whatever reason, this guy would be a problem for me. So I'm going to give him more respect than I give most people. And again, that's a deficient leader. If a leader is giving somebody respect based on how much they fear them, I think that's a deficiency. But we're all flawed. And I saw that over and over and over again. So because jiu-jitsu is such a hard thing to do as a means of income, that's what brought me back to law enforcement. Because I said, well, what am I good at? What can I go back into and have good benefits, good pay? And it was through kind of unique circumstances that I got a job offer at the Port of Seattle. I was actually teaching grappling at the Washington State Police Academy for new police recruits. Someone had heard that I was a former deputy and that I was a black belt. And they're like, he'd be a good guy to bring down to the police academy as an instructor and what they called role players, meaning I would roll with the recruits, give them the experience of fighting somebody that knew what they were doing. And through that, I met people that worked at agencies all over the country, or rather all over the state, rather. It's a statewide academy. And one guy came up to me and goes, hey, if you're looking to get back into law enforcement, the Port of Seattle is a great department. And it was a timing thing because I knew I needed to start another professional career that would be the right fit for my family. And they talked to me about schedule, pay, benefits, retirement, all the things that sound good. And I was like, you know what? I'm in. Let's give this a try. And I went through the selection process and took the test and took the PT test and the psych and the lie detector and everything. And it was pretty streamlined. I got hired quickly. Now, Washington State wouldn't recognize me as a law enforcement officer because they said I went through a federal academy and they don't recognize federal academies. So just like that, I went back through the academy and went through Washington State's academy this time. And, you know, a lot of people were saying, that's fucked up. You have to go through a second academy. And at the time, I wish it would have been waived because I didn't feel like spending 6 months in the police academy again. But hindsight being 2020, it was good for me. Because federal policing and federal law enforcement versus local policing and local law enforcement, it's night and day. One almost has nothing to do with the other. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise that I had to go through the academy again. And I learned how to police on a local level. And, you know, I enjoyed that department. I think they did a very good job at hiring. They had good, I feel like they have pretty good camaraderie. I feel like they have pretty strong relationships between leaders and subordinates. And I was happy there. I liked my chief. I liked my sergeant. I liked my coworkers. And if those things work well, and if an individual is happy with those three aspects of police work, you can stand on your head and shit all day if that's what they want you to do. Because as long as the guys to your left and your right are guys that you can enjoy sharing your shift with, that's 90% of the work. There's always going to be the drug addicts and the petty thefts and the car prowls and the drugs and all the bullshit that we deal with on a daily basis. Guess what? That's police work. And I didn't enjoy that stuff. It got monotonous. It got old. And it also got frustrating because you would do your job and King County prosecutors don't take any cases. So regardless of how proactive you were, what you see in a lot of police agencies is people start to lose motivation because it's like you got guys that bust their ass and make all these arrests and all the charges get dropped and they're back out on the street and they're slinging dope and they're high and they're breaking into cars and they're stealing bags from the airport. They're doing all the things that they're always doing. And even though that stuff was frustrating, I took it with a grain of salt. I understood it was part of the job. It's the culture of Seattle. And I didn't allow that to taint my perspective of the agency. And I'm a fucking human. Just like anybody, there's days I love the job and there's days that I hated it. And there was days I walked into my sergeant's office, said, I'm fucking done. I quit. I am no longer interested in being a police officer for X, Y, and Z. And he'd be like, Greg, sit down. Let's have a cup of coffee. And he talked me off the ledge. And the next day it was all good. And I was fortunate to have leadership like that. I was appreciative of the people that I worked for. And they took care of me. The port showed me on several occasions that they do care about who I was as a person. They do care about my individual needs, my family's needs. And it was refreshing because I didn't get that in the federal system. The federal system really made you feel like a number. They could give a shit what you needed, what your family needed, emergencies that presented themselves. And so it was a breath of fresh air working for an agency that I felt like these guys are behind me. Because if the people that you work for don't have your back as an officer, fuck, man, it's only a matter of time before you have a use of force complaint or you have a questionable shoot, like any of the things that happen to cops. If your chain of command doesn't have your back, you can't work for that agency. Simple as that. And I know agencies that hang dudes out to dry because they don't want to attach their name to things. And it's just disgusting. And so I was happy with that agency. And fast forward 3 years, I was a patrol level officer for 3 years with them. That's when the whole COVID thing kicked off. And that's what brought me to the seat that you see me sitting in right now, because my life changed dramatically inside of a month. And most of you guys already know the story. You wouldn't be watching this or listening to this podcast if you didn't, but I'm still going to share it because like I said in the beginning, I want episode 1 to be something people can circle back to if they want to get to know me at a later date in my story. So, I don't like to think of myself as on the left or the right. I hold my opinions and my values, and I have my perspectives on most issues, but those are my perspectives, and those are what I hold in my heart. And I don't feel like I need to be projecting those on other people or sharing them with the other people. Like, if we want to have a discourse and we want to talk about things, great. But what I found was with the COVID thing, I didn't look at it as a right versus left issue. I looked at it as big government was telling people, individual citizens, how they could live their life privately. And it right out of the gates, it kind of took me aback, and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I understand that there's a disease that people are dealing with here. Okay. I understand that better than most people. My best friend on this earth, we've been friends since we were 11. He was the best man at my wedding. He's a doctor in Queens, New York. He has 200 COVID patients, and I talk to him probably 3 times a week. I understood that there was a pandemic taking place. But it was equally as clear that because of that pandemic, that certain politicians were using that as what people were calling the power grab. And they were dictating what we could do and what we couldn't do and where we could go and how close we could stand to people and what we had to have wrapped around our face and all this shit on its surface. It didn't make sense to me. Okay. Now, I don't claim to be the sharpest tool in the shed. So I like to think I can put my trust in people that understand things better than me. And it's something that I'm comfortable with doing. If you're a subject matter expert, please take control of the situation. So we closed our gym down, we closed CrossFit, we closed jiu-jitsu, and we said, let's see what's going on here. Like, this seems like the potential to be a very dangerous and deadly thing. and we took the correct recommendations of the government. And then I sat back and I started to observe. And I'll tell you right out of the gates, there's 4 or 5 things right out of the gates that made me raise an eyebrow and be like, what? Well, this doesn't make any sense at all. And what that was for me was the governor and the governor's office of Washington State declared what was essential versus what is non-essential. Essential gets to continue. Non-essential, stay home, stay safe. And the list of what was essential was licensing for your vehicles. Okay, so if you need new tabs for your car, that's essential. Okay. Now this is so dangerous that restaurants and gyms can't be open because people are going to die. But if you need tabs for your car, those places are open. Okay. Liquor stores. What? Why would a liquor store be essential when a restaurant isn't? Marijuana shops. Now, weed is legal in Washington State, and I support people smoking weed. You do you. Like, let's go. Like, I'm down with that. Even as a cop, like, the drug thing was always weird for me because, like, you do what works for you. And if you're not infringing on other people's liberties, fucking have at it, right? But when you looked at essential versus non-essential, weed. Washington State lottery kept running. That was deemed essential. Construction contracts that were bid on government jobs were found to be essential, but private bid construction contracts was non-essential. So if you're building a building for the government, come to work. If you're building a private building for a private corporation, stay home, stay safe. Well, what the fuck is that? Anyone with 2 eyes can look at that situation and say, yeah, this isn't about staying safe. Because if this was so deadly and this was so dangerous, well, it's one of 2 things, actually. It's one of 2 things. If it's so dangerous that I have to stay home to stay safe, but you're telling someone that's building a government building, hey, come here and keep building it. Either you're bullshitting us on the dangers of this disease, or you don't give a shit about people. You want them to just come and build your buildings and get sick and die. And so right out of the gates, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then it took a turn for the worse. Not only did it not make sense to me and most of my colleagues in my profession of law enforcement, and it didn't make sense to most of the citizens out there, but they started using us as the enforcers to these rules. And this is up for debate, okay? And like every single law and every single order can be litigated until you're blue in the face. There's people that make entire careers off of arguing things in the court cases. Supreme Court justices, who is the highest law in the land, will have varying opinions on things. And I expect people to have varying opinions with me on this. But my perspective was simply this. I am a law enforcement officer. I signed up to enforce law. And not only law, but for me, Washington State law. There's a process for law to be created. There's a legislative process. And for it to be put on the books, it has to go through these processes. And once it is ratified as a law and it is put on the books and recognized by our government and by our law enforcement, now I as an officer can say, hey, I saw you steal this from this store and I have probable cause to arrest you for RCW violation, blah, 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 blah. Well, we are not executive order enforcement officers. That's not our title. And so when I started seeing guys arresting moms at the park, guys surfing, people going to the gym, checkpoints of cars to see if you had essential papers, like that was a big one for me. That's straight Nazi Germany stuff. You don't get to stop a car unless you have probable cause that they committed either a crime or a infraction. And so we, as law enforcement officers, we have to have what's called reasonable suspicion, probable cause, in order to deprive people of their freedoms. Okay. If I'm going to detain you and say, you have to stay, you are not free to go, I have to be able to articulate in my report why I had the legal authority to do that. And so I went to my sergeant and I went to my chief and I said, I know we're not being asked to enforce these things, but I want to have a clear understanding of how this is even acceptable behavior from a law enforcement officer in the event I do find myself in a situation where it's like, hey, Greg, you're on the north end of SeaTac and there's a group of people that are violating social distancing. We need you to break that up. Like, wait, what? I wanted to have an understanding of what my authority was, where it was derived from, and how I would be legally allowed to enforce any of this stuff. And I got the same answer both times I talked to my chief and my sergeant. They said, this is something that we don't fully understand. And this department doesn't plan on taking enforcement actions. And great. That made me happy to hear. I didn't want to take enforcement actions against citizens, especially if I'm being told by my chain of command that we don't really understand the legal authority that allows us to do that. So this is a first for our nation. Nobody's went through this before. And people all the way up and down the chain of command were like, yeah, I don't really understand how we can enforce these things that the governor's requesting legally. And then every time I turned on the TV, another person's getting arrested and hauled off in handcuffs because their candle shop was open or because they're on the beach. Just a bunch of weird shit that I knew in my heart is not within the scope of what we do as police officers. And I'll tell you, it's not me. I'm not on the fringes. I'm not this wacko out in left field. Every single officer that I talked to and that I worked with and that I knew around the country was in complete agreement with me. They're like, Greg, we can't believe this either. This is asinine. I would never do this. I would never do that. And every conversation I had, and I felt like I was giving fucking sermons in the lunchroom because I'm standing up when people are getting arrested on the TV. I'm like, look at that. How the fuck is that cop putting that guy in handcuffs because he's paddleboarding? What fucking law did that guy violate? And everybody in the lunchroom's like, yeah, this is insane. I would never do that. And I got so sick of hearing cops saying I would never do that. And then every time I turned on the fucking TV, a cop was doing that. So there's some kind of disconnect. Every cop I know is saying I would never do that. And then I'm seeing cops do that. So what is really going on? And this is what it comes down to. It comes down to cops in their heart don't want to be doing that. But because they're being asked to by their local and their state governments, they feel like in order to keep their employment and pay their mortgage and feed their kids, that they have to just bend the rules just a little bit. You know, like I don't think I'm violating people's liberties, but I'm just, they're saying the park's closed, so I'm just going to kick them out of the park. Well, do you have the authority to kick them out of the park? Because if you don't, you can't do it. It's not up for fucking negotiation. It's not up for discussion. It's not, I'm going to bend the rules this one time because my governor thinks I should do this. It's not how our job works. And I finally got to a point where I was like, you know what? I need to address police officers nationwide as a police officer. And that's why I chose to do my video in uniform and say, hey guys, and I wasn't telling guys what to do or what is right or what is wrong. Like, I'm just a fucking dude and I get that. My whole point in making that video was simply this. People's constitutional freedoms, people's liberties are what we are sworn to uphold. That is what our oath is. That is what we are sworn to uphold under the oath that we took to the state and the people of this state. And if you're doing something that is violating those people's liberties, you're going to feel it in your heart. And if it feels wrong and you feel like you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, you got to ask yourself, should I be doing it? The answer is probably pretty clear. The answer is probably already understood in your heart. But now you're torn between your heart and your paycheck. And to me, that's gross. Like, why should any officer who our entire career is based on being moral, ethical, legal, and be put in a position where we have to weigh what we feel is morally and ethically right versus maintaining, we make sure we keep our weekly deposits into our Chase account. That's what motivated me to speak to law enforcement officers. And I spoke to officers out of two different concerns. One concern is the citizens' liberties that are being trampled. That's the primary concern. You don't have the authority to tell this mom she can't play catch with her daughter. We don't have the authority to do that. We have to talk about that. We need to stop what we're doing right fucking now, and we need to have a conversation, police officer to police officer, about how we cannot violate people's rights. But the other thing I was concerned about is the reputation of law enforcement has not been good over the last decade and a half. And I was like, all of these things that cops are doing is going to continuously erode our reputation. And it's unfortunate because most police officers are good people. And that's something that I will stand behind till the day I die, because I know it to be true. Most police officers are good people. They stand for the right things. Their heart's in the right place. But because of this confusing pandemic and these executive orders, cops were starting to be pulled in two different directions. And the public was getting sick of it. It was crystal clear. The public was getting sick of it. So I felt like I needed to say something, not only to protect people's liberties, but in order to protect our reputation as officers. You know, I've talked about it before. As an officer, I've commonly gotten dirty looks. People look down at the ground. They don't want to make eye contact with me. They don't want to engage me with conversation because they think I'm there to hem them up on something. But outside of law enforcement, when I'm wearing my Marcus Almeida Buchecha jiu-jitsu t-shirt, I have no problem walking up to anybody in any scenario, in any place, and having a good, healthy conversation with them about whatever. And it made me realize, like, dude, I put this uniform on and it makes people reluctant to open up to me. And why would that be? There's only one reason that would be. And that is because our culture they've painted a narrative over the last however many years. And a lot of it is based in fact. I'm not saying that police officers haven't done fucked up things to people over the past however many years. But I feel like people really honed in on the officers that are doing the wrong thing. And it painted us all with a broad brush. And I knew that our reputation is fragile. And I knew that our reputation has the ability to implode on a moment's notice. And I didn't want to see that in our profession. That was the motivation of my video. And I think the proof is in the pudding, because every single law enforcement officer that has reached out to me, like literally probably tens of thousands now. Wow, Greg, your message is powerful. Thank you for sharing it. That's what we all feel. Finally, someone spoke up on how we feel. Someone finally got the message out there. We like sergeants writing me, "Hey, Greg, I just want to let you know I pulled your video up and played it in roll call. I wanted all my officers on shift to see it." And over and over and over and over, so many officers reaching out to me, thanking me for sharing the message that we all believed already. But everyone was afraid to share that message because it could potentially cost you your livelihood. And what happened to me? It cost me my livelihood. Now, it's not over yet. It's still in litigation. I'm still in a paid leave status while the investigation is completed. But for sharing a message that I felt was necessary and that was well received by both the public and police officers nationwide, someone above me, and I believe it to be all the way to maybe the governor's office. I will probably never know where the order came down from. They said, "You can't be putting messages out like that." I said, what do you mean I can't be putting messages out like that? I put that message out there to unify people. I put that message out there to prevent violence. I put that message out there to try and help officers and citizens come to some type of understanding that it's not us versus them. We're not against each other, that we should be on the same team. We should be together on this. And, I got the runaround about how my video was a violation of social media or how I was being insubordinate when I said I didn't want to take it down. And, I feel like I'm a pretty, like, I can look at a situation and kind of understand what's going on. That's a skill set that I've developed over the last 20 years through different operational roles. And it was crystal clear to me that this wasn't about being on social media. This wasn't about me being insubordinate. This was about the message. Someone somewhere didn't like the message. And finally, it was the chief of police that shot me straight. And he said, Greg, we support 95% of what you said. We know you're a good officer. We have nothing but respect for you. You've been a phenomenal officer over the last 3 years. But at the end of the day, you spoke out against the governor. And we can't allow that. So, was it directed from the governor's office, or was it simply a chief of police that saw the writing on the wall? I'll probably never know. But they told me that I will be terminated over it, and now that process of termination is taking place. And the funniest thing about this, I've had a lot of people reach out to me and be like, bro, are you fucking Nostradamus? Like, you called this to a T. And I want to address that right now. I don't think I called anything, because who could have predicted the George Floyd incident with that pathetic cop holding that dude down for 10 minutes? And, this is becoming a point of debate in itself. Oh, well, George Floyd was a drug addict. George Floyd was a convicted felon. Yeah, maybe those things are all true. But from my professional standpoint as a police officer, guess what? I've arrested felons. I've arrested drug addicts. And I've never pinned them to the ground for 10 minutes until they died. Okay? It is clearly understood from every cop that I know that what he did was completely despicable. But what happened was, and this is just me, it's just Greg talking, this is my opinion. Yes, what he did was terrible. And yes, what he did was going to cause public outrage any way this played out. There's nothing good that can come from what that guy did on film. But I think that the fact that it happened at the tail end of the COVID era, that everybody was put in this pressure cooker. Everybody was already frustrated with the government. Everybody was getting frustrated with police officers. Everybody was sick and tired of sitting at home, not making their income, not having the ability to pay their bills, not being able to partake in their hobbies and their interests, not being able to see their loved ones. And in some states, it was much worse than others. But in some states, they were treating people like prisoners, and people had it. And I think the death of George Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the catalyst that fucking made this thing just implode and shoot up into orbit. And now what do we have to do? Now what are we left with? I don't have the answers. I'm sure it'll be a topic of discussion for many future podcasts. I think the only answer is somehow unify the people, unify law enforcement and the public, and bridge the gap between the public's trust and the profession of law enforcement. But it's so much easier said than done. I feel like we have a 10-year uphill battle to make up for all the ground that was gained. I feel like it was taken away in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And it just sucks, man, because what we saw was one officer that was motivated by what? I can't tell you what he was motivated by. And I don't think you can either. Was he a racist piece of shit that said, you know what, there's a black man under my knee and I'm going to kill him? Is that a possibility? It is. I'm not going to argue with people or dispute that. He might be an evil, twisted fuck that has deep-seated racial hatred in him. You know what else it could have been, though? It could have been a guy that has his head up his ass, doesn't train, doesn't take his job serious, just doesn't have the ability or the humility to look at himself and say, hey, I'm doing something wrong here. I'm being stupid. Like, People are telling him to stand up. So what do insecure people do when someone's telling you to do something? No, you know what? No, fuck you. I'm going to do the opposite. It could have been that. Maybe he didn't have the humility to be like, hey, these people are all yelling at me to get off this dude's neck. Maybe I got to take a step back and ask myself if what I'm doing is the right thing. He obviously didn't have that ability as a man, but why didn't he have that? And there's a good chance none of us will ever know. And so now this has turned into a police officer versus citizen. It's turned into white cops versus black men. It's fueling the fire of all the things that are a stain on our profession. It's bringing up all of these past hatred and these negative feelings that are attached to our profession. And in my opinion, right now as a police officer, it might be the worst time in the history of our country. It's a sad time to be a police officer. And it's interesting that me standing up for what I believed to be moral and ethical took me out of the fight 3 weeks before everything imploded. I have friends all over the country, especially in Seattle, that are talking about the riots, talking about Molotov cocktails being thrown at them, talking about how squad cars are being burned and the precincts are being overran. And it's warfare out there in certain places. And what is today? Today is June 12th. I think things are starting to slow down. Who knows where it's going to go? By the time this gets released, maybe things will be under control. Maybe we'll be on the path to peace again. I hope so. But I think just as likely as things can continue to degrade and the public relationships and the public trust continue to degrade, and cops are going to find themselves in a real bad spot moving forward. I think I've done a decent job in showing you guys who I am from the beginning of my professional career all the way to the current events of what we're facing right now. And all I can say is moving forward, it's going to take work from both sides. It's going to take cops saying, maybe we reallocate funding to training differently. Maybe we do pair with healthcare professionals that can deal with crises a little better than we can deal with. Because cops are expected to wear 40 different hats. On one call, you're fighting a guy. The next call, it's a suicidal subject. The next call, it's a elderly man that's had a heart attack. And it's like medical emergency, violence, depression, anxiety. It's just on and on and on and on and on and on. And you expect one man or one woman to be proficient in all these things. Maybe we do need an overhaul of the system. Maybe we do need to specialize units in certain aspects of police work. And again, I don't claim to have the answers, but I think an open dialogue is the first step. The other thing that we need to remember as both officers and citizens is that the people that are voicing displeasure, the people that are voicing these concerns with the police department, the majority of those people aren't voicing this out of hatred. They're not voicing this out of fuck the police. I truly believe in my heart that the fuck the police narrative is the minority. And just like how a small percentage of bad cops paints the whole profession, I think a small amount of protesters that are violent, that want to steal, that want to burn, start to paint the narrative for the majority of protesters that literally aren't happy with what they see in the system. And they literally want nothing more than an overhaul that's going to bring our society in a positive direction. So how do we do that? And I'll tell you, it starts with conversations. It starts with stopping of throwing stones at each other. And the majority of both sides are going to have to come together. And you can have whatever stance you want on this. You can be far over here. It's like, fuck all cops and all white cops are racist and all that, right? And if that's your stance, good luck ever bridging the gap and moving forward together. And it's the same thing with the cops that are like, fuck those protesters. They're a bunch of dumb 20-year-old kids. Like, yeah, they might be a bunch of young kids, but guess what? They're idealistic and they believe something, and those are their feelings. And regardless if you agree with them or not, they're very real to them. So discrediting them and telling them that their beliefs are rooted in foolish things, and that this is the truth. Because what's their truth? Like, perception is reality. If someone perceives something a certain way, that's their reality. So how do we move forward? The only way to move forward is to respect their reality and validate them, give them a voice. And it has to go both ways. We have to be, the people on the one side have to be willing to listen to the police and what they have to say. And the people on the other side, or the cops on the other side, have to be willing to see like why the members of our community are so upset. And I think that that's the only way to gain traction. And I think we're going to have a lot of good conversations on this. I think there's a lot to be said, and there's people that are a lot smarter than I am, that have a lot more experience, that are wargaming right now and trying to come up with solutions to what we're going through right now. It's sad times, man. It's sad times. But I'll leave you with this. With all the negativity in the world right now, and all the hatred and all the destruction that we're seeing, something that I'm trying to remind myself of is that we still have to focus on the good. We still have to put ourselves in a position where we can enjoy our hobbies. We can enjoy our loved ones. We can enjoy interactions with the people that we like to share our time with. Because if we don't do that, what you're going to find is you're not good in here. And I'm going to do episodes about not being good in here. And for people that are listening, I'm touching my heart. If you're not good in your heart, you have a hard time moving other aspects of who you are in a positive direction. So if we want to come together as a society, and we want to help each other, and we want to love on each other, you got to be good with yourself first. And I think the most efficient and effective way to do that is, even though dark times are among us, focus on what you do well, focus on what you love, focus on putting your energy into positive things, build yourself up, continue to be on the path, and then allow that person that you become when you're on the path to be the person that takes a seat at the table, talking to people about how to best move forward and bring our society out of these dark times. So we just went for an hour and 37 minutes. I really appreciate you guys if you're still listening to me rant and rant and rant. But yeah, episode 1 is who I am. I want to bring you guys guests from all realms of life. I want to bring you guys jiu-jitsu people, officers, special forces operatives, fitness and nutrition experts. I want to be able to deliver something that's interesting across a wide spectrum, because I feel like if you pigeonhole your hobbies and your interests and your life, you're only doing yourself a disservice. So thanks for listening, guys. And until next time, that's a wrap.